Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to talk quickly about an open source project we are doing in the community and essentially make a bunch of call to actions so that you join us in building this product, or rather joining this project. So for any of you who have been participating in these workshops, you probably have seen what we're working on, but for those who are new, I'm just going to do a quick recap of what the project is, what the bigger picture is, and what we're trying to do. So the idea of this project is very aligned with what I've been sort of advocating for in these workshops, which is the topic of knowledge ops. So what if we had machines who wow. What if we had machines that read all of the knowledge that we need to do our jobs and make that available to us whenever it is needed within our workflow? So essentially, operationalizing knowledge is what I've talked about a few times. There are the recordings of all of that, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but a very, very high-level version of the idea is, what if we have machine learning agents that could collaborate with each other and find the pieces of information that we need and provide it to us as we work? So, these pieces of information that are necessary for our work are things like data, code, access to tools, access to documentation, and probably a few other types of knowledge that we normally have, that we normally use to do our jobs. And the importance of operationalizing these is to enhance our ability to communicate with each other, to collaborate, and to manage our projects. I previously, again, like in these talks, talked about skills that we need to be able to do all of these things using AI. So we need to have machine learning models that have language skills, like language models do. Sorry, larger language models do. We need models that have reasoning skills, like we can build around large language models to have that ability. We need we need models that can use tools. And because these days most tools can be called programmatically and language models can write code, that's another area that we can significantly use large language models. So, previously what I presented was, what if when I'm walking, running, whatever, an idea comes to me and I want to quickly explore it, what if I could just, pick up my phone and start talking to it, or start typing to it on a Slack, and it can go out and find a bunch of information for me based on, understanding what is the objective that I have and coming up with a bunch of tasks about it, prioritize these tasks, find relevant tools to execute these tasks, and use a memory to keep track of everything, and reflect on the performance of these tools, and eventually decide if it needs human input or it can continue running all the tasks, and just go through this loop again and again and again to carry out the task that I'm interested in. Last time I introduced this concept, this idea of a live book. So what if we had a book that would write itself, and you can use a companion app to talk to it? So instead of having to read this book, you can just use it as an encyclopedia, if you wish, where you just ask questions that you need whenever necessary. So that's when I introduced Sherpa, and I mentioned it a few times on a call today. It is available on our Slack right now in the alpha stage. You can go to the technical questions channel and type at Sherpa, followed by a question, and Sherpa will provide an answer. And I'm saying an answer because it is in alpha. It might not be perfect, but it is getting better over time. And your contributions, because this is an open source project, can definitely make it better. So, but go there, play around with it, and see what the performance is like. And I'm presenting this project today as the person who's done the least amount of work for this project. There are a lot of folks from the community and our company who are working on this project. They're contributing, they're spending a lot of time on a project. And we're always looking for new eyes and brains and hands, coder hands on a keyboard to contribute to this project. So hopefully next time I put up this slide, your picture is also added to it. So reach out if you're interested. So let's get into the details of what Sherpa does. Again, like I presented this briefly last time, we run a lot of events like these. So we realize that we're essentially creating a lot of transcripts that are not necessarily available to everybody, at least not in a usable way. So the first step of Sherpa was, can we get a large language model-based pipeline to create a structured summary of these transcripts and put them on a GitHub repo as an open book? And that's a part that we've been working on for a few months. We have a decent performance there. I know Sue has talked about how structured summaries have a lot of problems, but for the intents and purposes of giving you a general idea of what this event was about, and what was talked about, and what are takeaways, it does a decent job. And, obviously, Sue has talked about a much longer list of challenges that need to be tackled when you're doing something like this. And, I refer you to that talk to get a much better understanding of the challenges along the way. But then, we realized that this open book is growing very large, very rapidly. And, sitting down and reading it would be very challenging. So we thought, what if we use the idea of agents on top of this book, along with other resources like the documentations of important open source projects, different types of tools we use, and create an agent, a question answering agent on top of it that also has access to Google, and make that available through a Slack, so that anybody who wants to know something about LLMs can just quickly go there, ask a question, and Sherpa can answer it based on the content of the open book as well as the internet and other types of documentation that we're indexing. So this is the backlog of the project. So since this is an open source project update, I thought that it's a helpful thing to show you the work that has been done. Obviously, I'm not including a lot of work that has gone into building the foundations, the operational side, the deployment side of this, as well as some of the initial work that we've done. But since last time, we have added the ability to cite resources that Sherpa uses. So it provides links to these resources. We have added the ability so that you can type a question and paste the link and ask a question about that link. We are doing better error handling and the structured summarizer, as I mentioned. Currently, we are improving the multiplayer behavior because it's a Slack app. So multiple people can talk in the thread, and Sherpa should be able to respond to that. So we are trying to figure out the kinks of that multiplayer scenario and improve the performance. Sherpa does multiple steps of reasoning before answering a question. So it takes about 30 seconds or so for it to answer a question. But that's because it is doing multiple queries to different knowledge sources before it provides an answer. And we want to make those steps of reasoning and information gathering available through the Slack app, so that you can see something like, you ask a question, then it says, okay, I'm going to Google for this query, then I'm going to look into documentation for this information. Oh, okay, now I have all the information, here's the answer. So making that more transparent, I think, is a very important step for user experience. That's something we're working on. And importantly, we are also, currently we're using OpenAI, but we are also considering, sorry, we're not considering, we are acting on switching at least parts of the calls we are making to a large language model to a self-hosted small open source large language model. And I know that's a bit of a contradiction there, small large language model, but Suhas has spoken about that at length, so I'm not going to go into details there. And the things that are coming up is obviously adding more tools and resources. So we want to index more documentations that are up to date, and tools like ChatGPT don't have access to. But also we want to start creating tools. Like, a lot of the time you have to figure out, what Hugging Face model should I use for something? What LLM should I use for something? What prompt engineering technique should I use? Even like on the business and the startup side of things, I have an LLM idea. Can this be a business? What does it take to make it a business? Blah, blah. So we are interested in indexing, resources related to these, and also creating tools that are specialized in answering questions about these different topics. And of course, that list of tools is going to be very long. And, any of you can come in with your idea, like you're talking to somebody, for example, who has built a project around answering questions from scientific papers. So, that could be one of the tools that we add to Sherpa. And of course, consistency and accuracy and all of those things, as Suhas also talked about, is very important for us to get right. So I'm going to go into 3 specific things that we've done since last session, and talk about why we did that, and what are some of our observations, and hopefully that's helpful for you too. The first one is very relevant to one of the topics that Richie was talking about, which is taxonomy. So a problem that we noticed is that for example, I can ask something like, what is line chain? And the system and Sherpa can respond that. But then I do something like a follow-up question and I say, what are agents? It answers the question, what are agents? But the frozen model does not have the context that agents are related to line chain, right? Because the problem is that we are using a large language model to do reasoning. And this reasoning is about a relationship that did not exist when GPT was trained, or on the data that GPT was trained on. So therefore, those types of taxonomy, those types of relationships are not existent. So we tried retrieval augmented generation for quite some time, but that wasn't fixing the problem. Like essentially, whenever there is a long distance, long range relationship, when the system is generating a thought for chain of thought type of ideas, it doesn't know about this relationship. So it doesn't generate the right query to send to the right tool and get the right information. So the only solution that made sense for us to do was to grab a smaller open source model and fine tune that model on the new documentation. Like, for example, grab the line chain documentation and fine tune this small large language model on that context, so that it starts to learn those relationships, and then use this model as one of the steps of reasoning. So it doesn't completely replace OpenAI, like very much like what Suhas was talking about. It doesn't completely replace OpenAI. Like OpenAI is still, the best NLU and NLG layer that we can use, but it replaces some of the specialized tasks, like understanding the relationships between things and generating the right queries and calling the right tools and things like that. So we went ahead and used, and by the way, we also decided to use QLoRa, like a quantized adapter for this training, so that it is a reusable process, so that if we run into another problem and we want to solve it with fine-tuning, we can essentially just remove the QLoRa layer, put in another one, fine-tune it for that task or for that problem, and just swap them in and out using the same base model. So the fine-tuning steps, and by the way, I haven't created this part of the slides. The team has worked on it. So if you have questions, I will try to answer, but they are on the call. I can ask them to give you more details, but you can also reach out to me later about them. But essentially, we use Hugging Face to do the fine-tuning, and Colab. Google Colab was sufficient for our fine-tuning of the Llama 2 7 billion parameter model. And as I said, we used LoRa for that. And for those who are less familiar, LoRa adapters are, that was redundant. Sorry. LoRa is an additive, fine-tuning process. So which means that you can easily add the LoRa weights to the frozen model weights and run a fine-tuned model. And we did see very decent performance after this fine-tuning, although the base model didn't know about line chain. Now the fine-tuned model is able to answer a question about line chain. And now we are in the process of figuring out, or rather benchmarking, how this fine-tuned model is going to handle, that logical reasoning for the problem that I talked about. The next thing, as I said, was, resource citation. We wanted to make sure that Sherpa provides links to all the resources that are relevant. And, we are using retrieval augmented generation, which means that we use a few different tools to find information. We bring back the information, we put them in the context of the large language model call that provides the last response. And we could include metadata like the URL of the information, of the source of the information. And it sounds easy enough. Just put the URL in the context and tell the large language model to spit out that URL, the URL that it uses to answer the question, right? And that actually surprisingly works well for many scenarios. But in a few scenarios, especially if the link is too long, or a few other cases that we observe, since we are asking the model to generate the link, it just gets confused and it hallucinates the link, or it just generates a link that goes to a no page. So that was the problem that we had to solve. Like essentially, although we were providing URLs as metadata, it wasn't getting it right. So like this is an example of where it was completely missing the mark. So a question, and as I said, like it wasn't always getting the links wrong. Like for example, in the left example, it has gotten the link right, like that's where the information has come from. But in the right one, because the language model itself has the context of that entity that we're asking about, it just gets confused about the right link to use. So our solution to that problem was to not put the link inside the context, but rather only provide an ID to the document, and then ask the model to just say which ID it has used, and then use a bit of a post-processing process to reinsert the URL back into the response afterwards. And this post-processing type of things is very common when you're trying to do more serious activities with large language models, because they would produce results that are almost kind of sort of right, but you just need to take a few more steps to go the last mile. So that was an interesting experience we went through. I believe this is not yet deployed, so if you're talking to Sherpa on a Slack, you might still get incorrect URLs, but hopefully it will be available very, very soon. The last thing was something that we saw people were doing on our Slack in early testing, which was them putting in a link and asking a question about the link. During the earlier talks today, I did that a few times. When people posted links in a chat, I asked Sherpa, what are the key takeaways provided in this link, right? So we wanted to be able to handle these. But the problem is, and by the way, sorry, again, like it was able to handle this surprisingly in some cases. And the reason was that it has access to Google. So what it was doing behind the scenes was that it was just calling Google, saying, search this URL and get me some information from it, and then try to answer the question from the information that Google returned, which, in some cases it happened to work. But, that's not a very reliable thing, because if the information that Google returns is not relevant to the context of the question you're asking, Like if you're saying what are the takeaways, that might work. But if you're asking about an entity, like for example, what are the names of food ingredients mentioned in this link, and if that's at the bottom of the page that the link goes to, it's unlikely that Google returns that by default. So what we needed to do was to figure out a way to get the information we need without going through this Google search hack that the system just did on its own. So what we ended up doing, and of course, like the page could be very long, so we can't just grab the whole thing and put it in a context. So instead, what we did was inspired by the web tool on Chat AutoGPT project. Was essentially grabbing scraping the URL, grabbing the whole text, summarizing the chunks of it, and essentially saying, summarize this in the context of this question. Like, try to answer this question using this chunk, and just do that repeatedly for all the chunks that are available in the document. And then do that a few times until the summary can fit into one call, and then essentially put the question and that summary in one context call, and then get the response. And that's been performing pretty well. This is a slightly hacky version, and it occurred to me later that we could have used the hierarchical index from Llama Index, which might be something that we explore. So if any of you have played with that as opposed to what I described, I would love to hear your feedback about it. Also about a citation and fine-tuning Llama 2. All of these are work in progress. So if you have played with these and have opinions about how we can do them better, please reach out. So this is an example of the performance. The question is, what does this link say about Dora and Hawaii? On the very left side, you're seeing the actual snapshot of the text that contains the answer. The middle one uses the old system, and the one on the right is the dev version of how it's going to behave going forward, which is the scraping and summarization thing. The middle one is the one that uses Google to get the information. All right, so as I said, this is an open source project. Today, we are officially making an alpha release of this project in our community Slack channel. So everybody who is on our Slack can go to the technical questions channel and interact with Sherpa, asking questions and getting any sort of information you want. It has, like, we position this as something that can answer questions from an LLM book, but it has access to Google, so you can really ask it anything. It is currently only available in our public channels. Therefore, you have to be okay with what you're asking to be in the public. We might consider, and there were some requests about making it available through DMs, because you might want to ask questions that way. And we might, most probably, will implement the rate limit, because we are paying for the deployed version of this and all that, those good things. But it is openly available. Please use it as much as possible. Please give us feedback about what you observe, and even better, just join the project and help us build this together. By the end of September, which is going to be our next workshop, we are going to be trying to install this app in a few other community Slack channels. We are in conversations with 2 community owners. And if you are a community owner or somebody who is, we would love to talk to them. We are specifically interested in communities that are AI focused or communities that are founder focused, because a lot of the resources that we are going to be indexing are going to be in these 2 domains, and we expect things that Sherpa can answer accurately would be related to these topics. And finally, what we are hoping to do is to make this available on the Slack marketplace by January. There might or might not be other applications that we build on top of our backend, but Slack is the first one. Discord is a very likely next one. But who knows, maybe we create WhatsApp. But again, like, if you want to help us build any of the above, please reach out, and we can work on this together. And ultimately, the vision of this project, because if you're talking about an open source project without a vision, that's generally not very pleasant. So I'd like to tell you what my world domination plan with this project is. I'm part of probably 20 different Slack channels, and a few Discord channels, and a few WhatsApp, groups, and have to check the internet and social media and blah blah blah. So it is very hard for me to really know what is going on in these places where my communities, my people are coming together and talking about things. I might miss important information. So the goal of creating this project is to go beyond this live book and become this hive mind of information that exists in all of these different communities, and make it available to people of all of the different communities, so that I don't have to be actively monitoring all of my Slacks. I can just ask questions in the one that I most frequently use, and it can give me information about what is what in other communities. One interesting feature that somebody was suggesting to me a few weeks ago for Sherpa was also trying to index people as well. Like, if I'm asking a question, Sherpa can provide an answer, but he can also make suggestions about who I can tag to ask that question. There are some privacy questions to be answered around that, but that's an interesting topic that can be discussed, and probably done responsibly could be quite an interesting addition. Again, if that's something you're interested in, please reach out. Lastly, I'm just going to do a quick few plugs about Aggregate Intellect, our company that is sponsoring this project. So we help other companies essentially do LLM projects if they don't have the bandwidth or expertise to do it themselves. We primarily work with the startups, but we are open to talk to anybody who's doing an LLM project. If you're interested, please use that link to book me. I'll put it in chat as well. And our process is very, very rapid. We leverage our almost 6,000 people community to deliver projects, which means that we can move really, really fast, even compared to your internal teams. So definitely reach out if using LLMs is something you're thinking about.